This week on Brian Ross Investigates.
Called strike three, down goes...
Baseball blues. The overdose death of a Los Angeles Angels pitcher, Tyler Skaggs, leads to some ugly truths.
8 major league players took the stand during the trial, 5 admitting they got pills from K.
A new drug scandal hits America's pastime when players and owners can't even agree on when the season should start. Acclaimed sports journalist Jane Leavy brings us the latest. Plus, trouble down on the ranch. Cattle ranchers going out of business.
They're dropping like flies. We are losing cattle ranchers at an alarming rate.
Price of meat at the grocery store is at an all-time high, but the ranchers are seeing very little of that.
Well, sometimes nothing, and sometimes just, I hate to say it, but peanuts.
And this week's winners and losers in the media. See if you agree with the choices made by the editors of Mediaite. From the studios of the Law&Crime Trial Network in New York City's Herald Square, this is Brian Ross Investigates. Good evening, and thank you for joining us, and welcome to our viewers on Facebook Live. I'm Brian Ross, joined by my colleague Rhonda Schwartz. And Rhonda, we begin tonight with the baseball blues. Not only are negotiations between owners and players likely to delay the start of this year's season, but the sport has been rocked by a new drug scandal. It's all coming to light now following the overdose death of a Los Angeles pitcher, Tyler Skaggs, and testimony in a recent court trial about widespread use among other players. Rhonda?
That's right, Brian. A member of the Los Angeles Angels staff, Eric K., has been found guilty of providing Skaggs with counterfeit fentanyl-laced pills, essentially acting as an in-house drug dealer for the baseball team. He faces a minimum of 20 years in prison.
A former Los Angeles Angels employee has been convicted in Tyler Skaggs' death nearly 3 years after the pitcher overdosed and died in a South Lake hotel room. He faces 20 years in prison and will be sentenced in June.
Skaggs, an Angels standout pitcher, was found dead in his hotel room in July 2019, prior to a series against the Texas Rangers. Prosecutors argued it was Kay who last spoke to Skaggs the night he died and supplied the 27-year-old with counterfeit oxycodone containing fentanyl.
We're obviously disappointed in the verdict. We thought there were many reasons to doubt the government's case.
8 major league players took the stand during the trial, 5 admitting they got pills from K, referring to him as the go-to guy for pain pills.
So to get a better understanding of the impact of all this, we're joined by the acclaimed sports journalist Jane Leavy, author of books on Mickey Mantle, Sandy Koufax, and her latest, Babe Ruth, the Big Fella. Jane, thank you for being here tonight. The trial of the Los Angeles Angels staff member made big headlines with a number of other players testifying about widespread use of opiates. But was it a big surprise to you?
Drug use among healthy young males who play sports is never a surprise to me. And unfortunately, what it did at a time when nobody's playing baseball or planning to play baseball, is it reignited memories of the cocaine scandals of the 70s or the Pittsburgh Pirates. And it pointed up exactly what is the matter with Major League Baseball right now. They're always behind in fixing problems that they should have addressed beforehand. So, for example, Skaggs' death obviously caused, in addition to great pain to a lot of people, a change in MLB policy. Up till then, they didn't test for opioids. And a new report in the Washington Post suggests that the opioid use isn't actually rampant. Since they started testing in 2 years ago, MLB has done 12,169 drug tests in the last 2 years. And of those, they nabbed 15 steroid users and 0 opioid users. And the minor leagues, they confirm the numbers, and they've been doing the same kind of testing, but for much longer, that for 2 decades. And there's almost no opioid use reflected in those numbers.
Jane, as you know from your coverage of so many baseball figures and the sport itself, these players play with a lot of pain often. Is that the reason they would turn to opiates? Is it pain, or is it simply for pleasure?
Actually, the history of drug use in clubhouses and it being, made easier by clubhouse attendants and what they call clubbies goes back a long way. it used to be amphetamines. Greenies is what they called them. And often in a major league clubhouse, you would see a bowl of them just sitting around available next to the sunflower seeds and the bubble gum. And so this is not a new phenomenon that somebody is there to help them. It was rampant. Greenies are rampant for 40 years, starting right after expansion of Major League Baseball and the increase in travel and the hours on the road for these guys. The season is grueling, and it has gotten longer and longer thanks to extra layers of playoffs, and they're zigzagging all over the country between time zones, and they're exhausted. They're worn out. By August, everybody's injured, and I think it's treating as much the breakdown of their bodies as it is treating pain.
Jane, a question for you from Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
Tens of thousands die from fentanyl and opioid overdoses. Why is it important to pay attention to a Major League Baseball player's death?
I think it's, it's sad to say, but in a way, it can be useful in pointing out just how endemic this has become, and epidemic it has become. If it's happening in Major League Baseball, people might sit up and pay attention. The unfortunate flip side to that, Rhonda, is that right now, when Major League Baseball is doing everything it can to basically, commit suicide with another foolish labor stoppage, that means the spring training games are not starting next week, and nobody's reported to spring training except minor leaguers. It's one more way in which it makes clear that baseball is always behind, 3 steps behind in dealing with issues that everybody knows exist.
Jane, one question I have is, it seems likely that others on the team and management of the Los Angeles Angels must have had some idea of what was going on. Is that the next shoe to drop here?
I would guess that some players knew. Whether the management was insulated, I know Tim Mead, who was one of the guys who's been, implicated in this. He's a wonderful guy. That would surprise me a lot. He's a very decent human being. I think they would shelter the people upstairs, but that it happens is not at all surprising. And they don't have in place the testing, and they haven't had in place the testing or the medical care or the counseling, the rehab that people need. It was the same thing when Mickey Mantle was drinking too much. It was the same, in the 50s. They're always behind. And now they've got a situation where they have medical staffs, team doctors, paying for the right to say they're the team doctors. So it's a completely corrupt system in which players can't trust that they're getting confidential or competent care.
And so you think there's still a wide gap there between what should be done and what's being done?
Absolutely.
All right. Jane Leavy, the acclaimed sports journalist, thank you so much for joining us here tonight.
My pleasure.
Up next, hamburger prices at an all-time high at the grocery store. So why are so many cattle ranchers going out of business? You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law and Crime Trial Network.
Hi, this is Dan Abrams with exciting news for all of our Law and Crime followers on YouTube. You can now get the live Law and Crime Network with YouTubeTV for all of your daily live trial coverage, legal news, expert analysis, and original true crime programs. Subscribe to YouTubeTV today and then locate Law and Crime in the channel guide. And for only $1.99 a month, you can add the network to your bundle. Watch Law and Crime every day with YouTubeTV. We put you in the jury box.
We turn now to trouble down on the farm, where cattle ranchers are up in arms about what they say in a lawsuit are the dirty tricks of the Big Four packing houses, keeping prices for beef and pork high for consumers while allegedly conspiring to keep the prices they pay the ranchers artificially low. American shoppers know the price of hamburger is at a record high. But what they may not know is that very little of the money they spend for hamburger ends up in the hands of American cattle ranchers. Many of them are being forced out of business.
And we're joined now by Bill Bullard in Billings, Montana. He's the CEO of a nonprofit group that represents American cattle ranchers. Mr. Bullard, thanks for being here. With those hamburger prices at an all-time high, it must be a great time to be a cattle rancher.
That's what consumers would be led to believe, but it's exactly the opposite. Consumers are paying super inflated prices for beef, while cattle prices are receiving seriously depressed prices for cattle, many of them not able to recover even their cost of production from the marketplace.
So what's going on that makes that the case?
Well, we have four packers controlling 85% of the marketplace. They have a stranglehold on the market. They're able to leverage down prices. We have alleged in a lawsuit that they have actually conspired to artificially depress prices paid to cattle producers while at the same time inflating beef prices for consumers.
So you're saying they get together to decide what the price should be?
That's exactly what our lawsuit alleges, that they have colluded, conspired to gain an advantage in the marketplace at the expense of cattle producers on one end of the supply chain and consumers on the other.
And who are the four big packers that you're focused on?
They are Tyson, Cargill, JBS, and Marfrig. And both JBS and Marfrig are Brazilian-owned companies. So two of the four largest packers that control 85% of the fed cattle market are in fact foreign-owned.
This month, JBS agreed to a $52 million settlement with the Department of Justice to settle a federal antitrust lawsuit. The company did not admit any liability, but its background has long raised questions about its ethics. Started decades ago by a small-time butcher in Brazil, JBS has now grown into a multi-billion-dollar worldwide beef, poultry, and pork producer, the largest in the world. But the two brothers who now run the company have been connected to a massive bribery scheme in Brazil. Joe Maxwell is a longtime spokesperson for cattle ranchers and family farmers.
There was a lot of illicit behavior, bribing of 1,800 politicians in order to bolster a loan through the Brazilian government so they could enter the U.S. markets. And they have continually been a corrupt organization demonstrating corrupt practices from top to bottom.
Well, we allege they're a part of the conspiracy. We know when they came to the United States, we tried to urge the Justice Department to block them from trying to merge and acquire many of our domestic beef packing plants, but we were ignored.
In Washington, a bipartisan bill that would cut the power of the big four packing companies has now been introduced.
We're joined now by Senator Charles Grassley, Republican from Iowa. And Senator Grassley, thank you for being with us here this evening. Can you help our viewers understand the issue for American consumers and American ranchers when it comes to beef prices?
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of surprised that one of these companies paid $52 million for price fixing. That case goes back to 2015. Beef is higher now than it's ever been before. I can't say that they're price fixing today, but I can say this, that the cattle feeder, the person that produces this meat, particularly if he's a family farmer in Iowa, as opposed to the big feedlots in Texas, Kansas, and Colorado, that this cattle feeder is not making any money, and some days he can't even get a market. And if he gets a market, it's maybe 30 days down the road. And this is this way because four big companies dominate the market by about 85% of the daily kill. And with their cozy relationships between these big feedlots in the states I said, and those feedlots contract ahead, then the family farmer, it's difficult for them to get a market when about 90% of that daily kill is already marketed. And so we have a lot of farmers in Iowa and Nebraska and the Midwest generally that don't like to contract ahead. Some do, but most don't.
So for Americans who are going to the supermarket to buy their meat, they see the prices going up, yet the family farmers aren't making any money?
They are not. Or if they are, they're making just a little bit. And yet we have these four big packers making fantastic profits.
So the packers are making up to $1,800 a head. What is the family farmer making a head?
Well, sometimes nothing, and sometimes just, I hate to say it, but peanuts.
Senator Grassley, whose family has long farmed in Iowa, where he sometimes pitches in when back home, says JBS got off easy with its Justice Department settlement.
Compared to their profits, how much is that? $52 million.
Oh, well, you can imagine, peanuts again.
Senator Grassley, you and I have known each other for more than 50 years now, well before you were United States Senator. And all this time, you've always been fighting for the family farmer. Is it a losing battle?
No, it won't be. There's still plenty of room for the family farmer. I wouldn't give up on the family farm at all.
But many cattle ranchers have had to give up.
They're dropping like flies. We are losing cattle ranchers at an alarming rate. We've lost over 500,000 already in just the past 4 decades. Our industry is in a serious contraction. And if something isn't done immediately, the American rancher will no longer look like what it is today, the industry.
Bill Bullard, thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
My pleasure. Thank you.
JBS declined to have one of their officers appear on our program tonight, but in a statement, the company denies any alleged wrongdoing and says it settled the federal government's antitrust lawsuit only to avoid excessive litigation costs. The company says it always acts in good faith, and it says in full compliance with the law. Up next, this week's winners and losers in the media. We'll check out the choices made by the editors of Mediaite. You're watching Brian Ross Investigates on the Law&Crime Trial Network. Time now for this week's winners and losers in the media, as chosen by the editors of Mediaite. And we're joined by Aidan McLaughlin, who's the editor-in-chief of Mediaite, which, like the Law&Crime Trial Network, is part of the Dan Abrams Media Group. And Aidan, you've chosen as the winner this week Jim Sciutto at CNN, a reminder of the importance of CNN at a time of international crisis.
That's right. So Jim Sciutto is a CNN anchor. He's actually been anchoring his show from Kyiv in Ukraine this week, and he posted a very worthwhile Twitter thread in response to those in American media who have been praising Vladimir Putin this week. The thread was an incomplete accounting of the various opposition leaders, dissidents, and civilians that Putin has targeted, poisoned, and even murdered. It's not the kind of thread that should be necessary to post, I don't think, but this week, Fox News host Tucker Carlson asked on air why Americans should not like Putin. I think Jim Sciutto provided a very convincing answer to that question with that thread.
And Sciutto was one of my colleagues when I was at ABC, and in my view, ABC foolishly let him leave for CNN, where he's been a real star, a solid, straight-shooting reporter.
That's right. And as you noted, he is a really good reminder of what CNN can truly do. It's one of the only true international news outlets like the BBC. And Jim Sciutto, who has had a remarkable career as a foreign correspondent at ABC, at PBS, at CNN, he also served as senior advisor to the U.S. ambassador to China under President Barack Obama. So he has an incredible career covering this kind of stuff. And when you see his reporting from Kyiv in Ukraine, that really seeps through. You can really tell that this is someone who knows what he's talking about and is delivering very compelling reporting from over there. So it's great that we have reporters like that covering these sort of conflicts abroad.
And as you have said to me before, this is a time when CNN really shines.
That's right. They are truly one of the only international news outlets that we have, and they have 24-hour coverage. They have a big team in Ukraine covering this sort of crisis. And so it's something that CNN can do really, really well, and it's great to see them do that. And honestly, I prefer it far more than some of the other coverage that you see on CNN that they get criticized for, which are, the large panels dissecting the latest thing that Trump said.
Let's turn now to this week's loser chosen by the editors at Mediaite. Candace Owens, tell us about her and what she has to say along this same line of inquiry.
Right. So I just want to point out how different our winner and loser are this week. You have Jim Sciutto, who is a journalist with decades of experience as a foreign correspondent. And then you have Candace Owens, who is a political pundit who has made a name for herself as sort of a pro-Trump flamethrower in recent years. She now has a show at the Daily Wire, which is the website that was founded by Ben Shapiro, and she developed quite a following. In any case, she drew a lot of unwanted attention this week for a tweet in which she claimed that Putin is actually right about Ukraine, and that his invasion of a sovereign country is actually America's fault. Now, I am all for pundits criticizing America and its foreign policy. That is something that journalists should do repeatedly and be dedicated to doing. What Owens did here is she looked at Putin's speech about Ukraine, which was, as dark and ahistorical as it comes, and essentially concluded that Ukraine as a state does not have the right to exist. And she said, Putin is right, and America is at fault here for this invasion. It's not only misinformed, it's an approval and a defense of an invasion that is entirely Putin's decision that is going to end up costing a lot of innocent lives. So, it's kind of a shameful thing to be posting about on Twitter. And also, I should say, at the end of the day, if you ever find yourself saying, if you want to know what's really going on here, listen to this speech from Putin, which is what Candace Owens said in this tweet, you should reconsider.
Right, her words were, we, capital W, capital E, are at fault. And as you say, at a time like this, it's important for American journalists to raise questions and challenge the administration. We all know what happened in Vietnam and Iraq, where misinformation led us into disastrous situations. Even so, how are you seeing the reporting going so far as we approach a near World War III?
I think the reporting's actually been quite good. The press gets a lot of criticism. And in fact, one of the most prominent critics this week was Edward Snowden, who said that he was, disgusted to see the American media rooting for war. Now, I actually asked Jim Sciutto about that. I interviewed him last week, and he said that no American media wants war because he, as a foreign correspondent, he's seen war up close, and it's bloody and it's deadly and it's horrific. And I think that's an unfair smear of American media. I don't think anyone's rooting for war, and I think American media overall has done a pretty good job of covering it. The same cannot be said for Russian media, which has, particularly RT, has some different incentives.
Right. Aidan McLaughlin, editor-in-chief of Mediaite, thank you so much for being with us here again tonight.
Thanks, Brian.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. We'll see you again back here next week. Have a good evening.